A Hispanic worker who survived the Hard Rock Hotel collapse is facing deportation. His lawyers fear it's because he spoke out about unsafe conditions at the site. Duke Carter spoke with people who support him and immigration leaders who say there's a lot of misinformation about why that worker could be deported.
This is all extraordinarily suspicious, strange circumstances.
Attorney Mary Yanik with New Orleans Workers Center for Racial Justice is wanting to know why the Honduran man, Delmer Joel Ramirez-Palma, a construction worker, is in an immigration holding facility in Louisiana and could be deported.
He's terrified. He believes that he was retaliated against.
Especially after Ramirez-Palma spoke about the unsafe conditions at the scene of the hotel collapse last month to the Hispanic media organization, Jambalaya News.
It happened only 2 days after the collapse. He's well known as someone on the job who spoke out about safety concerns in the past.
Yanik believes deporting Ramirez-Palma could impact the Occupational Safety Health Administration's investigation into what led to the hotel collapse. Attorneys are worried other undocumented immigrants may now fear about speaking with federal investigators.
My hope is that there is a reconsideration of this decision to deport him. ICE fully has it within their power to release him, to not deport him, to delay the deportation.
But the immigration leaders disagree.
This individual is in custody because he has a final order of removal. And so it is concerning to me, and I agree that there is fear in the community because these claims are being made, but these claims are irresponsible and they do a disservice to the community.
Officials say the reason Ramirez-Palma is in a holding facility is because he already had a deportation order since 2016.
This particular individual, indisputably, is in the United States unlawfully, had his day in court, was ordered removed almost 4 years ago, and has been in the country unlawfully since that time.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement leaders say 256,000 people who were here unlawfully were deported in 2018. And ICE leaders say they don't enforce anything unless a federal judge tells them.
Nothing that ICE is doing is made up by ICE. These are federal laws that Congress passed. And so if people have a disagreement with what the laws are, there is a process in our country to change them. That process lies with Congress.
In New Orleans, Duke Carter, Eyewitness News.
Now, while we don't know the exact circumstances surrounding Ramirez-Palma's deportation, federal officials say a little more than half of the deportations in 2018 were convicted criminals. Also, about 6,000 were suspected gang members or terrorists. Attorneys for Ramirez-Palma say he could be deported as soon as Monday.